She's been called the Queen of the Forest Canopy and Treetop Barbie, but her mission is pragmatic and very down to earth. Joining us ahead of her appearance Friday at the Jacksonville Zoo is Nalini Nadkarni. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So, the Treetop Barbie moniker is kind of a joke, but you actually helped create a Barbie doll. Tell us a little bit about that.
That's right. That's right. I'm a forest ecologist and a scientist, and I spend a lot of my time communicating with other scientists. But I also know that there are a lot of disturbances and interferences going on with forest ecosystems. And I felt that, as a scientist and as a person, it's really important for me to not only do scientific communication, but also to make more people, all kinds of people, aware of the importance of trees and forests to people and to the earth. And I began thinking about how I could sort of awaken the interest of little girls, especially little girls who are growing up and living in urban areas and cities where they might then not be able to climb trees the way I did when I was a little girl and first sort of fell in love with trees and wanted to protect them and help them. So I began thinking about ways that I could connect what girls already really love to trees and forests. And I, of course, came up with Barbie because pretty much every little girl and many little boys love Barbie and really look to Barbie as a role model. So I approached Mattel back in 2004 with the idea of creating a Treetop Barbie. They were actually not interested in that. It didn't quite fit their brand. And so my students and I began making our own Treetop Barbies by buying used Barbies at consignment stores, getting volunteer seamstresses to create little outfits, field outfits, buying helmets on eBay, and then creating a little pamphlet about canopy plants to go along with her. Well, fast forward, that was really small scale, very, 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 very small scale. But fast forward to 2021, and it turned out that National Geographic and Mattel decided to create a line of Explorer Barbies based on this idea of inspiring young girls to be attracted to and connect with exploration type careers. They made a polar astrophysicist Barbie and a nature photographer Barbie and an entomologist Barbie. And they asked me to be an advisor on that project because it was sort of my idea to do that. And I was, of course, totally happy to do that. And as a thank you and recognition, they made me a one-of-a-kind Nalini lookalike Treetop Barbie, which I have in my lab and I'm really proud of.
Oh.
And I think it's not so much a story of my idea or Mattel or National Geographic, but really it means I think that there are more and more little girls who really do aspire to having a role model that is active and contributing to the environment like Treetop Barbie.
So, what inspired your own interest in ecology and canopy ecology in particular?
Oh, that's a great question. As with so many scientists, I think that initial attraction for me came as a little kid. My parents had a suburban home in Bethesda, Maryland, just outside Washington, D.C., and we were lucky enough to have these 8 maple trees that lined the driveway of our home. And after school, for whatever reason, I would find it sort of great joy in going out and choosing one of those maple trees to climb and basically just spend time in they weren't giant maples, they weren't amazing maples, but they were my maples. And none of my brothers and sisters climbed trees, and certainly my parents didn't. And so for me, it became kind of my place, my refuge, the place that I could think and reflect and watch squirrels and just kind of be myself up there. And so I remember as an 8-year-old taking a really solemn oath, as little kids do, of saying, well, when I'm a grown up, I'm going to do something to protect trees. And as it turned out, I sort of discovered the field of ecology, the science of understanding the relationship between the environment and plants and animals when I started college. And I realized that's really one pathway that one can take, that I could take to both understand trees, but also to better protect them.
But when you started in this field, the field itself of canopy ecology was really in its nascent stages. You kind of helped bring that along.
That's right. And I really feel privileged and lucky that I was able to see, sort of a sub-discipline of science start from almost nothing. Really was considered sort of Tarzan and Jane stuff of climbing trees with mountain climbing techniques, but to really understand that there is a world of the forest that we have not yet discovered. In fact, back in the 1980s, it was called the last biotic frontier. And so that just signaled that, there really were things to discover there that might be important, not only about the forest canopy itself, but about, as an ecosystem ecologist, how does what's going on in the canopy affect the rest of the forest ecosystem as a whole? And so for the last 42 years, I've been really trying to understand that and trying to communicate with other scientists, with other people, with forest managers, with all kinds of people about what is going on in this last biotic frontier that is a concern to us here, both on the forest floor and within the canopy. And it's been quite a journey as I've been able to observe more and more scientists getting involved with that. People now doing science using remote sensing, using drones, using modern scientific tools. Um, to really understand this fundamental and this critical part of the forest ecosystem.
I mean, so what is the importance of canopy plants to the ecosystem of a forest? And tell us a little bit, like, what is it like being up in a rainforest canopy?
Yeah, well, it's. I wish I could take you up there because it is so fascinating. It's really. It's well. First of all, at the most basic, the forest canopy has a very different, what we call microenvironment than the forest floor. The forest floor is very damp, very dark, no wind because of the overlying branches and leaves. But when you go into the canopy and climb up there, whether it's with mountain climbing ropes or a construction crane or a hot air balloon, however you get up there, what you experience is an environment that has much more sunlight, much greater extremes of relative humidity. There's a lot more wind up there. And so that microenvironment, that different environment, has given rise to the evolution of a tremendous diversity of plants and animals that live all or part of their lives up in the treetops. And so my fundamental question was like, well, what are these plants and animals doing up here? And how do they get there? How do they maintain themselves? How do they reproduce? What happens when they die? But most of all, what's most interesting to me is how are they affecting other parts of the ecosystem? And what I learned with my students and my colleagues is that these canopy dwelling plants are capable, because they don't have roots that go into the tree nor to the forest floor, they rely on water and nutrients that come in the form of mist and cloud and rain that bathe the rainforest canopy. And this rain and precipitation actually they contain small dilute amounts of nutrients that are dissolved in those raindrops. So these canopy plants are able to intercept and retain nutrients that are coming in from outside the ecosystem. They stay there in those canopy dwelling plant bodies for some amount of time, and then ultimately they fall to the forest floor where they decompose and they're available to the terrestrially rooted vegetation like trees and shrubs and herbs on the forest floor. So they're actually really important in maintaining healthy nutrient cycles of the forest as a whole. And in addition to that, their fruits and the flowers and the materials that they produce are available to birds and arboreal mammals for nectar, for energy, for nutrients, and for nesting material. So although they constitute sort of a small amount of the biomass of the forest as a whole, they have a disproportionately important set of roles that they play in terms of both nutrient cycling as well as providing wildlife, habitat, and other resources.
Nalini, you're a biology professor at the University of Utah, but you're also known for your creative messaging and your presentations that are innovative in a way that's sort of not unlike the Barbie that you helped create. You work in all kinds of medium. Work with artists, with dancers, with slam poets. Explain how you try to communicate environmental messaging through art and
Sure,
creativity.
you bet. That's one of the great joys of my life has been sort of the capacity to say, like, well, scientists communicate with these what look like really boring articles with no illustrations in scientific journals, and we give talks that are very dry and academic to other scientists, which are of great interest and importance to other scientists, but they don't really always connect with people who aren't in the scientific and academic world. And it seemed to me early on that artists have ways of communicating to audiences that are interested in sculpture or music or slam poetry or spoken word poetry or visual art that are equally as powerful in communicating ideas and concepts as scientific articles are. Of course, the content is different, but the idea of transmuting messages through the medium of art was very appealing to me because it seems like, well, maybe some artists wouldn't choose to go to an academic scientific seminar, but they would go to an art gallery or to a poetry reading or to a sculpture garden. And so I got some funds from the National Geographic Society to explore this, and I carried out a series of what I call canopy confluences, where I bring together a set of both forest ecologists, but also visual artists, hip hop poets, singers, creative writers, poets, and we spend a week in the forest together. We put canopy platforms into the canopy of this forest, and we spend a week out there camping, climbing into these platforms. The artists spend a whole day at a time sitting up on those platforms and perceiving the forest canopy and sort of translating and communicating what they perceive in their art or in their poetry or in their hip hop music. We spend the evenings together around the campfire and share what we saw, what we perceived, what we came to understand through whatever medium that the participants choose to do. And the result of that has been a series of art gallery showings, of modern dance performances, of poetry slams that don't just translate what I understand with my scientific mind to those audiences, but rather what the perceptions and the communication is of the artists themselves. Because artists aren't just translators, they are themselves perceivers and understanders of their environment. And it's been really wonderful to see the responses that come from dance audiences, from art gallery visitors, from slam poetry participants, to see how the wonder of what trees are can be to those who use these other media and people who receive those media.
You've also worked with the carceral community. I mean, people who are in prison,
hmm
and done presentations before those audiences. Why? I mean, what's the connection there?
Yeah, that it seems like what the hell is a forest ecologist doing in a state prison? And it seems like a very distant kind of non-connection. But when I was thinking, and working with artists, and I know that artists often obviously have access to forests. They can walk around the forest whenever they want. But when I was thinking of what is the group of people in our country who don't have access, really literally do not have physical access to nature or to forest or to trees, I realized that the people farthest away from the forest are people who are incarcerated, who because of their physical and their legal situations I can't go for a walk in the forest, cannot get the benefit of connecting or engaging with trees and forests and other parts of nature. And so back in 2004, I began a program called the Sustainability in Prisons Program, where we brought scientists to state prisons. I started it out myself by giving talks about trees. We started a moss growing project to try to help alleviate the negative effects of collecting mosses from wild primary forests for the horticulture trade, and I engage inmates to learn how to grow mosses to take some of that pressure off these primary forests. And that led to a whole scientific lecture series in a number of state prisons in Washington state. It led to collaborations with conservation groups like the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Nature Conservancy to train people who are currently incarcerated in rearing endangered species like the Oregon spotted frog, endangered prairie plants, the Taylor checker spot butterfly, so that these men and women were actively engaged behind bars in contributing to ecological restoration projects and conservation, and realizing that they themselves, although they're incarcerated, although they have been disempowered to become or be productive members of society, so to speak, can contribute to helping the earth. And it's been an enormously wonderful and successful project. It now exists in all of the state prisons in Washington state, as well as in other prisons around the country, to demonstrate that if given the opportunity, everybody has the possibility, everybody has the potential to contribute to trying to mitigate some of the negative effects that human activities have had on biodiversity and ecosystem function of our ecosystem.
So, in addition to all of the work that you do as a scientist and an educator, you're also a National Geographic Explorer. Explain to us, what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so I feel really privileged to have been named what's called a National Geographic Explorer at Large. When you get National Geographic, in addition to the many media things it does, also provides grants for scientists, for photographers, for storytellers. And if you get one of those grants, you're called an explorer. There have been about 20,000 over the history of National Geographic. There are about 1,500 active explorers now. But National Geographic has also has a designation that they've granted to 10 of their explorers. And I was last year designated as one of these explorers at large. So other ones are Sylvia Earle, the amazing marine biologist, Maya Lin, the architect, Bob Baller, the undersea explorer. And so my role as an explorer at large is really to carry out the work that I do in research in the forest canopy, but also to try to expand engagement of all of our explorers so that they go not only to museums or give lectures in big lecture halls about what their explorations are about, but also to go to underserved groups like people who are in prison, like older citizens, people in senior assisted living centers or kids in daycare centers, to try to spread the knowledge that we've been able to gain that has been supported by the National Geographic to as many community-based venues as we can. And so it gives me, being an explorer at large allows me to get access to the amazing resources that National Geographic has in terms of its media, its photographs, the knowledge base of all of its explorers, but to try to share that with as many people and as broadly as possible with the American population.
And so you're going to be here in town at the Jacksonville Zoo. It's a part of a
Yeah.
fundraiser event that they have called the Toast to Conservation on November 8th. What can people expect from you there?
Well, I'm really looking forward to being at the Jacksonville Zoo. I know that it's really just this incredible beacon of conservation and education, as well as providing information to people in Jacksonville and all of the visitors that go there. I'll be giving a talk, about a 40-minute talk about my own work in the forest canopy, letting people in the audience there know about the research and the conservation work that I and other tropical ecologists do in the forest canopy, but also talking about ways that institutions and organizations that, like zoos and natural history museums and botanic gardens, can play in informing and making the general population aware of the importance of maintaining biodiversity, of carrying out active research in conservation the way institutions like the Jacksonville Zoo does. So I'm looking forward to seeing the zoo, to learning about its active programs in conservation in Florida and around the world, and then linking that to some of the efforts that are going on, some of them supported by National Geographic, that go on around the world.
And just briefly, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing forest ecosystems today?
Well, there are so many challenges right now. I mean, with wildfires, with climate change, with deforestation and forest fragmentation. I think that what we really need is to raise awareness. I think one of the things that really plagues trees and forests is that they're silent and they seem to be sedentary. You know, they can't really speak for themselves. And so I think although really everybody loves trees, I've never met anybody who doesn't love trees. I think we often overlook the services that they provide and the wonder they provide and the absolutely critical ecosystem offerings that they provide in terms of providing oxygen and stabilizing soil. And so I think that when people become aware of the importance of something in their lives, whether it's the little patch of forest in their city pocket parks or whether it's some other aspect of their lives, they will figure out how to protect it. They will elect the right officials. They will contribute to the groups that support their conservation. But I think the biggest challenge is really that people, because of the nature of trees and forests being silent and not being able to advocate themselves, I think the biggest thing that I feel like I want to do is to raise awareness of how essential, how critical, and how important trees are in our lives.
Well, it's the Toast to Conservation, November 8th. It's from 6 to 10 p.m., and Nalini Nadkarni will be there. Thank you, Nalini, so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to being in Jacksonville. Thank you.
Thank you.